When the local real estate agent handed me the heavy iron key to the secluded cottage on Blackwood Ridge, he didn't smile or offer congratulations. He leaned against the wooden railing of the porch, glanced over both shoulders toward the dense wall of pine trees, and kept his voice barely above a whisper. "Just take a piece of friendly advice, Sadie. Keep to yourself, fix the roof, but leave the stone hearth in the kitchen alone. Some things in this valley were covered up for a reason." I thought it was just local folklore, the kind of dramatic nonsense small-town folks tell an outsider to keep them on edge. I had spent the last 8 years working 12-hour days in a high-pressure corporate office in Chicago, surviving on stale coffee and stress that kept me awake at 3 in the morning. When my body and spirit finally said enough, I sold my car, packed 3 suitcases, and bought this forgotten 2-acre property sight unseen at a county foreclosure auction. All I wanted was quiet. I wanted the sound of wind through the tall Carolina pines, the steady rush of the Waterfall Creek running along the back property line, and the space to finally breathe without a ringing phone in my ear. The cottage itself was weathered but sturdy. It was built from dark mountain stone and rough-hewn cedar, tucked halfway up the ridge beneath a canopy of ancient oaks. The garden beds in the front yard were overgrown with wild mint, lavender, and honeysuckle, as if whoever lived here years ago had loved the earth deeply before leaving it behind. For the first 3 weeks, the silence was medicine. I spent my mornings drinking tea on the front porch, watching the morning mist roll down the mountainside, and my afternoons peeling away layers of water-damaged wallpaper and sanding down the solid oak window frames. Whenever I drove down the mountain into the small town of Pine Creek to pick up nails and paint from the general store, I could feel the eyes on me. People weren't openly hostile, but they were careful. The older cashier at the grocery counter would pause when she scanned my items, looking at me with a quiet mixture of pity and curiosity. "Still up on the ridge?" she had asked on my second week, keeping her hands resting on the counter. "Must get awful cold up there alone. Clara used to say the winter winds on that ridge could shake the soul right out of you." That was the first time I heard her name, Clara. When I asked about her, the cashier suddenly found a stack of receipts that needed sorting. Oh, she was just an old herbalist who used to own the place, left town in the dead of night 20 years ago, lost her mind, people say, couldn't keep up with the taxes. The story didn't sit right with me. A woman who planted medicinal herb gardens that still bloomed 20 decades later didn't seem like someone who simply lost her mind and ran away. The answer finally came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, working with a crowbar to pry up rotted, water-swollen floorboards around the base of the massive river stone hearth. As the iron edge wedged beneath a loose slab of cedar near the chimney, the wood didn't crack. It lifted clean, sliding on hidden tongue-and-groove joints that had been meticulously carved by hand. Beneath the floor, resting inside a dry hollow lined with oilcloth, was a heavy, blackened iron lockbox. My heart thudded against my ribs as I lifted the cool metal into the afternoon light. It was secured with a small brass padlock, green with age. With one firm tap from the back of my hammer, the brittle lock gave way and snapped. Inside lay 3 things: a dried bundle of mountain sage tied with twine, a faded 1948 certified land survey, and a thick cloth-bound journal wrapped around a stack of unopened envelopes. I opened the first letter. The handwriting on the yellowed parchment was crisp, elegant, and firm. The header was dated October 14th, 20 years ago. It read, "To whoever has the courage to live in this house next. If you are reading these words, it means they finally told the town I ran away. It means Harlan Vance succeeded in turning my neighbors against me, and the sheriff looked the other way while my water was stolen. Do not believe their lies. I did not abandon this mountain, and I did not sell this land. Read the survey beneath this paper, look at the eastern boundary of the Waterfall Creek, and you will see what they are willing to destroy to keep their wealth alive. As I read the final line, the gravel in my driveway crunched under the heavy tires of a truck. I looked through the rain-streaked kitchen window. A sleek black pickup truck with a private development logo on the door had just pulled to a stop in front of my porch. A tall man in a tailored wool coat stepped out into the rain, adjusted his hat, and stared directly up at my front door. I stood frozen by the kitchen window, the aged parchment still resting between my fingers. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the glass. The man in the dark wool coat walked up the wooden porch steps with an easy, unhurried stride, the kind of walk that belongs to someone who thinks they own every piece of ground they step on. Before he could raise a hand to knock, I slid Clara's letters and the iron lockbox into a dry storage bin beneath the counter, smoothed down my sweater, and opened the heavy wooden door. The cool mountain air swept into the hallway. The man was in his early 60s, with silver-threaded hair cut close, sharp gray eyes, and the posture of someone accustomed to boardrooms and town council seats. He held a leather portfolio under one arm and wore a warm, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," he said, his voice smooth with a heavy southern drawl. "I'm Harlan Vance, Vance Mountain Properties." He offered a leather-gloved hand. I looked at it for a fraction of a second before giving a brief, polite nod without taking it. "Mr. Vance," I said, evenly, "what brings you all the way up Blackwood Ridge in a downpour?" Harlan let his hand drop naturally into his coat pocket, his smile never wavering. He glanced over my shoulder, taking in the freshly sanded door frames and the clean, modern lines starting to take shape inside. "Just doing my rounds as a neighbor and a town commissioner," he said, leaning lightly against the porch column. "We don't get many folks from big cities buying up old historical teardowns on the ridge. Heard you were putting in a lot of sweat equity on the old place." "It's a solid house," I replied, leaning against the doorframe, keeping the entryway completely blocked. It just needed someone who appreciated good bones. "Good bones, maybe," Harlan chuckled, though his eyes narrowed just enough for me to notice. "Dangerous terrain, though. That's actually why I drove up here today. My engineering team ran a geological assessment on the back ridge last month. The rock shelf near that waterfall creek behind your kitchen is unstable. With the heavy rains we've been having, the county is looking at potential landslide hazards along this eastern boundary." He tapped the leather portfolio under his arm. "I know you just closed on the deed at the county auction 3 weeks ago, Sade, but Vance Properties is currently consolidating that entire back tree line for a watershed preservation project. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 over what you paid at auction in certified cash right now. You walk away with a clean profit, and you don't have to spend your winter worrying about a collapsed foundation." The offer sounded generous on the surface, but because I had just read Clara's words 2 minutes earlier, I heard every hidden warning between the lines. He didn't care about a landslide. He cared about that eastern boundary. "Thank you for the concern, Mr. Vance," I said calmly, keeping my voice as steady as mountain granite. "But I didn't move all the way to North Carolina to flip real estate. I bought this cottage to make it a home, and I intend to stay." Harlan's smile tightened at the edges. For the briefest second, the genial commissioner mask slipped, revealing something hard and calculating underneath. "Well," he said softly, taking a step back toward the porch stairs, "just keep in mind that mountain weather has a way of changing fast. Things can get isolated real quick up here when the roads wash out. You take care of yourself, Sade." I watched his black truck back down the long gravel driveway, its red taillights disappearing into the thick curtain of rain. The moment the rumble of his engine faded into the pines, I locked the front deadbolt, pulled the iron box back onto the kitchen table and unfolded the 1948 survey map beside Clara's leather journal. As I turned the pages of Clara's handwritten records, the real history of Blackwood Ridge began to bleed through. Clara wasn't just an herbalist, she was a certified botanist who had inherited over 40 acres of protected mountain land from her grandfather. For decades, the natural mineral spring running behind this cottage had fed the public town reservoir in the valley below. Then, 20 years ago, Clara Vance's development firm discovered a deep vein of natural mineral water and rare quartz crystal beneath Clara's eastern boundary, worth millions if channeled into a private commercial bottling plant and luxury resort. When Clara refused to sell an inch of the historic forest, Harlan used his influence on the county board to falsify property tax assessments, cut off her municipal road maintenance, and secretly divert the Upper Creek line to dry out her herb gardens. In her final journal entry, written the night she was forced into exile, Clara had penned these words: "They think they can bury the truth under fabricated liens and quiet threats, but the land always remembers. The original deed of 1948 contains an unbroken sovereign conservation trust. As long as the hearthstone stands intact, no commercial entity can ever claim the spring. To the one who finds this, go to the county records vault, ask for box 44B, and show the town what Harlan stole." I looked down at the original surveyor's seal stamped in faded red wax at the bottom of the map. I had come to this mountain looking for quiet, but as the thunder rolled across the pines outside, I realized some silences are meant to be broken. The storm passed before sunrise, leaving the mountain pines draped in heavy white fog. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in my car outside the old brick county clerk's office at the center of Pine Creek. Tucked safely inside my leather shoulder bag was Clara's original 1948 survey, her journal, and the key I had found beneath the hearth. The clerk's office was quiet, smelling of floor polish and yellowed paper. Behind the long wooden counter sat Mrs. Gable, the same elderly woman I had seen sorting receipts at the general store a week earlier. When she looked up and saw me walking toward the counter, her hands paused over a ledger. "Morning, Sade," she said, adjusting her silver-rimmed glasses. "Roads weren't too washed out coming down the ridge?" "A few fallen branches, but the ground held," I answered with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Gable, I was hoping you could help me look into some historical property archives. I'm looking for County Vault Box 44B. At the mention of that box number, the warm look on her face vanished. She straightened up in her chair, her eyes darting toward the frosted glass door of the county supervisor's office across the hall. "Box 44B hasn't been requested in over 20 years, she said in a hushed tone. "Those are archived preservation charters from the old families. Most people don't even know those records exist." "Clara Vance knew," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "And I think you know, too." Mrs. Gable stared at me for a long, heavy moment. She didn't deny it. Instead, she took a slow breath, removed her reading glasses, and set them gently on the desk. "Clara was a good woman, Sade," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of old regret. "She treated my mama's arthritis when no doctor in the valley could help. When the Vance family started pushing her out, a lot of people in this town wanted to speak up, but Harlan owned the bank, he owned the lumber mill, and he controlled the school-born contracts. People were scared of losing their livelihoods." She reached beneath the counter, pulled out a brass ring of keys, and gestured for me to follow her down a narrow spiral staircase into the basement archives. At the very back of the stone vault, inside a rusted steel drawer labeled 44B, lay the official county seal copy of the 1948 Blackwood Conservation Trust. As Mrs. Gable and I spread the oversized blueprint across the archive cable, the full scale of the deception became undeniable. The original charter explicitly stated that Clara's 2-acre cottage and the surrounding 40 acres of mountain springland were legally bonded as an indivisible public conservation preserve.
Under state law, the land could never be seized through tax liens, could never be subdivided, and could never be transferred to private commercial developers unless the original hearth of the cottage was completely demolished. That was why Harlan wanted to buy the house. That was why the real estate agent warned me never to touch the kitchen fireplace. Harlan didn't want to preserve the watershed. He needed to buy the cottage so he could tear down that stone hearth with a bulldozer, which would legally dissolve the 60-year-old conservation trust and allow his commercial firm to siphon millions of gallons of natural mineral water from the public valley. He called an emergency town zoning meeting for tonight at 7, Mrs. Gable murmured, tracing the red wax seal on the document. He's presenting his luxury rezoning plan to the town council. If the council signs off tonight, his bulldozers will be up on your ridge by Monday morning. I looked down at Clara's handwritten notes sitting beside the official county charter. Not while that hearth is standing. At 7 o'clock that evening, the Pine Creek Community Center was packed with over 100 local residents. Harlan Vance stood at the wooden podium near the front stage in a charcoal suit, gesturing toward a massive architectural rendering of a multi-million-dollar private resort, complete with luxury spa villas and a commercial bottling facility. This development will bring over 200 jobs to our valley, Harlan was announcing, his voice booming through the speakers with easy charm. All we require tonight is the council's formal approval to rezone the inactive watershed along Blackwood Ridge. The old structures have been abandoned for decades, and the county will finally see the economic prosperity it deserves. The council members were nodding along, ready to raise their pens to sign the authorization. Before you call that vote, Commissioner Vance, the town deserves to see the original charter. The voice rang out clearly from the back of the room. The entire room went dead silent. Over 100 heads turned toward the double doors. I walked down the center aisle, dressed in a crisp black sweater, carrying the certified documents in my hands. Harlan's smile dropped instantly. His grip tightened visibly on the edges of the podium as I approached the council table. "Sade, isn't it?" Harlan said into the microphone, forcing a chuckle that sounded hollow in the quiet hall. "This is an official zoning hearing for registered local business proposals. Private property disputes are handled during open municipal hours." "This isn't a property dispute, Harlan," I said, placing the certified 1948 conservation charter and Clara's original land survey directly in front of the council president. "This is a permanent sovereign trust signed under state law. The land you are attempting to rezone doesn't belong to your development firm, and it never belonged to the county auction block." A collective murmur broke out across the crowd. Several older residents leaned forward, recognizing the distinctive gold lettering on the vintage county seal. The council president put on his glasses, reading the primary clause out loud into the microphone. "The Blackwood Spring and its 40 surrounding acres shall remain an undivided conservation forest for the health of the Pine Creek Valley, protected in perpetuity so long as the original hearth of the cottage remains standing on the ridge." Harlan stepped down from the podium, his face tight and his voice dropping low. "That document is an outdated relic from 60 years ago. The owner abandoned that property in 2004. "Clara Vance didn't abandon anything," I said, my voice carrying across the entire room with unshakable calm. "She hid these records where she knew greed couldn't destroy them, and as the current legal caretaker of that hearth, I have already registered this property with the State Historical Preservation Board as of 2 o'clock this afternoon." I turned to face the room of neighbors, looking into the eyes of the families whose water had been quietly at risk for 2 decades. The resort is canceled, the spring stays public, and Clara's name is officially cleared. A heavy silence hung over the room for 3 seconds, followed by a single person clapping near the back. Within moments, the applause swept through the entire hall as decades of unspoken fear finally broke. 2 months later, the first snowfall dusted the peaks of Blackwood Ridge. I sat in a cedar rocking chair on my finished front porch, wrapped in a warm wool blanket, watching the steam rise from a mug of spiced tea in my hands. The waterfall creek in the back forest rushed pure and clear over the river stones, its sound echoing through the quiet valley below. The state preservation plaque had been installed near the front garden gate, officially naming the forest the Clara Vance Memorial Nature Preserve. Harlan's firm had been stripped of its commercial permits, and for the first time in 20 years, the people of the valley walked the ridge with pride. I took a sip of tea, listening to the gentle crackle of the restored stone fireplace burning inside my warm home. I had come to this mountain searching for a peaceful place to hide, but as I looked out over the endless pine trees standing tall against the winter sky, I realized I hadn't just found peace. I had found purpose, I had found home, and I had given an old mountain its voice back.